So you guys know what to do. If you have any interesting clips that you want me to react to, you can send them to the Telegram link in the description. And let's get into what we have today, inshallah. So today I want to react to this clip from a guy called Wes Huff. He seems to be going pretty mainstream. He went on Joe Rogan. He went on other podcasts as well, talking about Christianity. And in this clip, he's talking about Islam. What's interesting about him is it seems that he's born in Pakistan and he grew up in some places in the Middle East. And some people argue that, oh, look, he must be an expert now about Islam and what Islam teaches because he's born in a Muslim country and he grew up in the Middle East. And I find that always funny because people fall for this. And it's so gullible to fall for something like that because, I mean, that would mean all the Muslims that are born in the West or in Christian countries are experts about Christianity. Nobody is going to ever say this. But somehow some people think, some Christians think, if a Christian is born in a Muslim country, that means he's an expert about Islam or he's an expert about what's going on in the Islamic world or the Islamic teachings. And obviously that's utterly false. And he's born to kind of preacher parents. So since a young age, he's been taught about Christianity. Now, I haven't seen anything disrespectful from him about Islam. He seems to be pretty balanced. He takes more of an academic approach when he wants to, let's say, critique Islam or the Islamic teachings or what Muslims believe in. So what's interesting about this guy is I actually sent him an email. I sent him a Instagram DM. I tried to get him on so I can actually have a discussion with him. I thought that would be great because, you know, you have so many of these Islamophobes, Christians, they are not just like criticize Islam, attack Islam, insult. None of them are actually genuine. None of them are academic. They're not looking for actual genuine discussions. Thought this guy, maybe he's going to want to do it, but crickets, heard nothing. I mean, this video is an invitation if you'd like to have discussion. I did the same thing with this other guy. What's his name? Cliff Nietzschel or something. He also has these videos where he talks about Islam and he's spreading Christianity. I sent him an email. I tried to reach out to him, but also crickets, heard nothing back. Anyway, we're going to have to, I assume many of these people, sadly, they avoid, interactions with Muslims who know what they're talking about because it would kind of show a lot of the false narratives and false, pseudo academia that they're pushing forth as non-biased kind of people. If they talk to a Muslim, then things would be a lot different. But hopefully they didn't just see the email and perhaps maybe he'll see this video and then he'll reach out and we'll have a discussion. Now, let's actually get into the video and see what he has to say about Islam.
How far into Islam did you get? Well, I researched it pretty heavily. Like I read the Quran cover to cover a few times and connected with some people who were doing academic work on the Quran. There was a period when I was in university where there were other Muslim students who during Ramadan, they would read the Quran from beginning to end, and I would do it with them, almost as a way to establish relationships, but also to talk through some of these things. And then I would also share some of what I was reading in the Bible as well. But in my 4-year undergraduate degree, I probably read the Quran 5 or 6 times.
Wow.
And in English, mind you, never in Arabic, which my Muslim friends would say, you haven't read the Quran because it only exists in Arabic, right? An English translation, they wouldn't consider properly being a Quran. But I read quite a bit of the adjacent stuff, the Hadith and the Sunnah, and then the Sirat Rasul Allah, the biography of the Prophet of Muhammad, Ibn Ashaq.
Yeah, so the first thing he says is like he's been studying Islam for years, read the Quran 6 times, and been in studies of. I mean, Muslims don't have anyways this kind of. Maybe he was doing it in a university or something. But Muslims don't have Bible studies like Christians, where they kind of sit down and do this stuff. But anyways, you can always be very, very skeptical whenever someone claims that they thoroughly studied Islam and went into detail on what Islam teaches, and you just listen to them. You figure out that they don't really know as much as they claim they do. I have many videos highlighting this so much. I have this video of this guy who said they studied Islam for 10 years and he thought Islam was only sent to the Arabs. I mean, if you read the Quran, you obviously been studying Islam for 10 years, you don't even know who Islam is sent to. So many people make these claims, but under scrutiny, you realize that they actually are not as well read or researched as they claim they are. He says he read the Seerah, he read the Hadith. Anyways, these are all claims that cannot necessarily prove or disprove. Then he says that haven't really read the Quran unless you read it in Arabic. Well, obviously, you haven't read the Bible unless you read the Greek text. You haven't read the Bible unless you read the Hebrew Old Testament text. You haven't read any scripture fully. If you mean by read it, mean reading the original writing of it. I mean, obviously, you don't have the original Hebrew of Moses or the original Aramaic of Jesus to begin with anyways. So you definitely didn't read anything original. But this is what Muslims mean when you say they haven't read the Quran, if they have told you that. When you're reading a translation, you're reading the meaning of the Quran. So you're accurately reading the description of what the Quran is teaching, the message of the Quran. Now, of course, the more translations you read, the more of the meaning you're going to get. So when they say, they don't mean like you're not reading the Quran or something, you're reading a different text. You are reading the meaning of the Quran in the end when you are reading a translation.
I was genuinely interested in it because of the interplay historically with Christianity and Islam. And also just trying to figure out, okay, well, what are the claims of this worldview? Could they actually be legitimate compared to something that I was raised to believe? And ultimately, I found them very wanting.
Really? What would you say? What are some of the main teachings in the Quran?
Well, I think Islam has an issue in that there are historical articulations of what's going on in the biblical stories that are just false. So the main one would be in the Quran, Surah 147. It denies the crucifixion. So it says that it has the Jews speaking and say, "We crucified Jesus, the son of Mary," which is kind of an odd thing. If the Jews believed he was the Messiah, that they were crucifying him.
Yeah, so he mentions the crucifixion, and he mentions it as a criticism of Islam, which is not. He's going to mention it again towards the end, so I'm going to comment thoroughly on the crucifixion. He mentions one point here, is that the Quran says, وَقَوْلِهِمْ, and they're saying, إِنَّ قَتَلْنَا الْمَسِيحَ عِيسَى بْنَ مَرْيَمَ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. We killed Jesus the Messiah, the messenger of God. So he's saying, they wouldn't kill him if they believed he was the Messiah. Because the verse says, the Messiah, the son of Mary. I mean, the one who is saying the Messiah, the son of Mary, is Allah. I mean, so many people have made this claim, but we always tell them the one who is describing him with the title, the Messiah, the son of Mary, is Allah. Allah is saying that they said, وَقَوْلِهِمْ, their statement. They made a statement that they killed Jesus, the Messiah here, the one identifying him as the Messiah, because it also says the messenger of God is Allah. Allah is the one who is saying this. Allah is the one giving him this title. Allah is not saying that they believe that he is the Messiah and he's the messenger of God. Because of course, if they did believe he was the Messiah, and if they did believe that he was the messenger of God, they wouldn't say it. But we can also take this, okay, let's take his understanding. Even if we take his understanding, we don't have an issue. If we were to take this understanding and say that, look, they are calling him the Messiah, they can call him the Messiah, mocking him. And what's really hilarious is you have in Matthew, where the Jewish people are literally on the crucifixion, the alleged crucifixion in the Bible, they're saying, "Hail the King of the Jews." They're mocking him on the cross by calling him the King of the Jews, which is what the Messiah is. So when they're calling him the Messiah there, it's not like that they believe he's the King of the Jews, but they're mocking him after the crucifixion. So they can say the Messiah as a mockery, not necessarily meaning that they actually truly believe it. So there is no really issues with this idea of what the Quran says, even though you're wrong anyways. Allah is the one who's given him these titles. It's not saying that the Jewish people are the ones who believe this.
If you think of the traditional Islamic narrative of Muhammad being a 7th century caravaner, I think it makes sense for some of the stories that you find of whether that's Abraham or Noah or Jesus, John the Baptist, Mary, who are in the Quran. Because I think what's probably going on is that you have an individual, if we're accepting the traditional narrative, that there was a historical Muhammad, that he's a caravaner, that he's traveling in and around the Arabian Peninsula up into areas like Syria and Jordan. He's being exposed to Christians and Jews. And I mean, the traditional narrative is that he was illiterate. So he's not reading these stories. He's hearing them orally. But because there's really no exposure to what we call the Old and the New Testaments, and even then it's up for debate whether they existed in Arabic as Arabic existed in like 7th century Hijizi script at that point in time anyways. But he would have been hearing these stories with no kind of discerning ability to differentiate between fables and campfire stories about these characters and what were the actual historically reliable non-apocryphal documents. So the earliest source material for Jesus are the 27 books that we call the New Testament, primarily the biographies of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But there are other stories that are apocryphal in nature, that talk about, say, Jesus, what Jesus was like as a child. So there's one called the Arab Infancy Gospel of Thomas. And the Arab Infancy Gospel of Thomas has a story about child Jesus. Now, this is coming a long time after Jesus. Everyone who knew Jesus was dead by the time these stories were developing. But the biblical Gospels are very sparse on what Jesus was like as a child. The Gospel of Luke has a very brief story of Jesus when he's 12, going to the temple with his family, and then teaching in the temple, and Mary and Joseph forget him in Jerusalem and then have to go back. But so there's a body of literature that pops up that's basically talking about, well, what was Jesus like as a child? And so infancy narratives become kind of this very popular, if we want to call them fan fiction, it's not really like a proper historical designation, but kind of like that.
Yeah, so look, he makes all of this, the old school, the same narrative of the Quran copying from the Bible and copying from Apocrypha. It's always repeated by Christian apologists, this absurd claim. But let's break down what he's saying first. So he's saying first, Prophet Muhammad was a caravan trader who's going all the time here and there to Syria and Jordan, and therefore he was hearing stories. Of course, that's false. That's not the Islamic narrative. He's claiming that this is the Islamic narrative. That's false. There's only two incidents that we have Prophet Muhammad traveling. One, by the way, anyways, the authenticity even of these narrations are debated to begin with, but let's accept that they were true. So we have one time Prophet Muhammad going to, let's say, near Syria, but he didn't even fully go into the middle of it, when he was young. He was like 12 years old with his uncle, Abu Talib. So we have this one time where he went, and then they came back quickly. And then you have another narration. The Prophet ﷺ was 25 years old with Khadija, his wife, where he went for trade. So you have two instances of Prophet Muhammad going. Then at the age of 40, for 23 years, he's regurgitating, allegedly, for lack of a better term, he's like bringing back all of these, this is a fictional narratives, He's like, he has the memory of the best person on earth. And he's bringing back all of these stories, in 23 years. And people on the spot come and ask him about the story of Joseph, the story of the story of Joseph, the Quran, the entire chapter of Joseph, how big it is. How is he accurately giving you this description of these narratives and stories? We know this is completely absurd. This idea that Prophet Muhammad is traveling here and there, learning stories, is false. It's not the Islamic narrative, and it's not the Islamic idea. Then he obviously quotes the Apocrypha text or the biblical text. Basically, let's highlight one thing, which is very important. Just because there's similarities in a literature, historical literature, there's similarities in the Quran, and they both are mentioning something similar, that doesn't mean that one copied from the other. And that's why we're going to tell the Christians, why don't you apply the same standard to your book? Okay, for example, you have the idea of the flood of Noah, and you have it, the flood, this idea of the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So why don't we say then that the Bible is copying the Epic of Gilgamesh? They would never say this. They would say, oh, no, there's a similarity. It's just because it's happened. Someone recorded it. They will make up all sorts of excuses. You have the Bible is full of all of these kind of traditions that come from pagan teachings and pagan beliefs. And then the Christians will argue, oh, no, the writers of the Bible would never copy pagan rituals. And they will come with all sorts of justifications for things which are similar in paganism and within Christianity. So they always pray this hypocrisy, double standard when it comes to that. Now, when it comes to the infancy, the idea of the infancy gospel, whatever, that text, which was the earliest Arabic translation we have of it is from 1299 ED or something, like way after Prophet Muhammad. But there is a Syriac manuscript of it. How did Prophet Muhammad get that Syriac text? What is your proof? It's all claims. Just because two things are saying the same thing, then one is copied from the other. And the Prophet Muhammad, how did he learn Syriac or Aramaic? Where is he getting this information from? There is plenty of works that are labeled as Apocrypha that are not mentioned in the Quran. And then you have the Bible mentioning certain statements and the Quran mentions certain statements. If Prophet Muhammad is a messenger from God, he's saying the same stories of the prophets. God is revealing to him what he revealed to Jesus, what he revealed to Moses, and what he revealed to all the prophets. So when a New Testament quotes the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is before the New Testament, people say, oh, that this is from the same God. Even though the Jews don't accept that. They will tell you, no, your religion is not a continuation of Judaism. But you will argue that because they're coming from the same God or whatever, it's fine for these parallels to exist. Why don't you apply the same standard when it comes to the Quran? Also, this idea of apocryphal text or an apocryphal whatever. Apocryphal text is not necessarily not a historical text. That is not correct. Apocrypha just means that it is not a non-canonical text, meaning that the Christians did not consider it to be from the canon of what they call today divine speech. Just because something is not considered from a canon of the Bible that you consider to be divine speech, it doesn't mean it's not historical. And even you see when he mentioned the story of the embassy, he says that potentially existed around the 7th century. And he said that it's debated there was no Arabic text. Yeah, there was no Arabic text for sure, 100%. It's not debated. There's no proof of any translation of the Bible that you have today. So Prophet Muhammad couldn't have been reading these things and couldn't have been getting it from Arabs that are translating it and reading it. And the Quran, by the way, was revealed in 23 years, 13 years of it in Mecca, and there was no Jews and Christians there. So obviously that's completely false. So this idea of Apocrypha, a lot of Christians rely on apocryphal text, by the way. Christians rely on apocryphal text for historical reasons. For example, First Maccabee, they rely on it for many things to do with military and the numbers of people and stuff like that. They rely on certain texts to be early writings of the 1st century that are apocryphal texts. They're not in the canon, but they accept it. A lot of its historicity, like the Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, about the traditions of the church, the Epistle of Barnabas, the first Epistle of Clement, and there's the other things that Christians rely on, which are apocryphal texts, in which they would rely on to be historically accurate texts. Now, nobody can prove that the story in the infancy gospel did not exist or was not circulating in the 1st century. Nobody can prove that. He said that we know it's not from the 1st century. Yet we don't have anything to show that it was, but you don't have anything to disprove that it was. So we have things that would tie it to the 2nd century. We have nothing that disproves this idea that it was not circulating in the 1st century. And if it was circulating in the 1st century, 2nd century, or whatever, how can you prove that this is not historically accurate, that actually an event that happened? We would claim, actually, that the fact that many of these stories exist in what you refer to as Apocrypha, just because you reject it as a Christian, we don't need to reject it. We would claim that this is supporting the Quranic narrative. It is actually showing that these are things that have historical bearing. They're not just fabricated out of nowhere, but they have historical bearing. And if they have historical bearing and they were being circulated, then there is a chance that these are events that actually took place. Bring your proof that there was groups actually believing in these things, that the Prophet Muhammad had direct encounters with them and he copied from them. And we know when the Quran was revealed for 23 years, Prophet Muhammad was not traveling anywhere. He was in Mecca and Medina when all of this revelation was coming down. So how is he able to recite all of this and say all of these things? And when he was not traveling to these regions, where is he collecting this information from? That is upon you now to provide proof for. So yeah, and one thing to kind of destroy this entire ridiculous narrative is, first, if Prophet Muhammad is copying, which as I said, he didn't provide any proof for, and we already showed the hypocrisy where they have all the copies of themselves, whether it is the Epic of Gilgamesh, whether it is the New Testament copying the Old Testament, whether it is the pagan traditions. We already showed all of this hypocrisy. But the most important thing is this, is if the Quran, if it's true that the Quran is copying from the previous scriptures and Prophet Muhammad is copying from the previous scriptures, then it will copy what it says word for word. It would copy what it says word for word. But we have historical errors in the Bible that the Quran corrects. One famous one is the story of Joseph. The leader at the time of Joseph in the Bible is called Pharaoh. And the leader at the time of Moses is called Pharaoh. But we know in Egyptology that this is false. We know there's historical Egyptian periods. We have the early kingdom or first kingdom and middle kingdom and the end kingdom, last kingdoms. We have all of these different differentiations between the historical periods in Egyptology, in Egyptian history. The new kingdom, the middle intermediate kingdom, and the middle kingdom. We have all of these different categories. So Joseph was like around the middle kingdom or in the middle intermediate kingdom. And Moses was in the new kingdom. And the term Pharaoh was not used because it was the period of the Hyksos. At the time of Joseph, it was the period of the Hyksos. It was a king. It wasn't a Pharaoh. The term Pharaoh was not used for the leader. It was later on historically used for the leader. It was used for the palace first. And then they started using it for the leader in the new kingdom at the time of Moses. But at that time, it was not even, it was the Hyksos leading. So it was a king, it wasn't a pharaoh. So the Bible is making a historical error there, calling the leader at the time of Joseph a pharaoh. Now the Quran corrects that. The Quran, if it's copying from the Bible, it would call the leader at the time of Joseph and the leader at the time of Moses, it will call both of them pharaoh. But it doesn't. It calls the leader at the time of Joseph a king, and it calls the leader at the time of Moses a pharaoh, showing you that it's not copying anything. It's actually correcting that false information in these scripts in the Bible. And you have information in the Quran that is not even in the Bible to begin with. For example, about Abraham. What is the source? And it's not in apocryphal text. So it's not in the Bible, and it's not in apocryphal text. So tell us, where is it from? For instance, we have the story of Abraham. And I don't want to give too many evidences. I'll give just one. There's many stories, many instances, which I mentioned before in my videos as well. But I'll give one example. You have Abraham, where the Quran has this record in Surah An'am. It has this entire dialogue between Abraham and his people. And it's showing you that they used to worship a planet, they used to worship the sun, and they used to worship the moon. This is not found in we don't see this in Apocrypha, and we don't see this in the Bible. However, we discovered that a historical artifact showing that in that time in Ur, we have a temple called Zugrat of Ur, which was, by the way, buried under the sand. And Sumerian language was not, it was a dead language anyways. Prophet Muhammad couldn't have read it. But the temple was also buried under the sand. We discovered that there is an artifact in it that says that the people at that time used to worship Triad, Ishtar, the goddess of Venus, a planet, and the god of sun, Shamash, and the goddess of moon, Nana. So the Quran is highlighting this historical reality fact that we're discovering recently, and is showing us, and which doesn't exist in the Bible or Apocrypha, about historical reality at the time of Abraham. Where's the Prophet Muhammad bringing this information from? If he was, as you claim, copying these stories from, and I can give more evidences. Now it's upon you to demonstrate. Where is Prophet Muhammad bringing this information from? Produce your proof. Where is he getting this information from if it didn't exist in these places and it didn't exist in what you're claiming Prophet Muhammad is copying from? Now, the last and final most important point is this idea that the Bible, anyways, the earliest manuscript you have of the New Testament is 400 years later. We have quotes so early from church fathers, I mentioned this before, like Origin of Alexandria in 2nd century, whatever, talking to you about corruption in manuscripts. He says it's so severe that we have corruptions in manuscripts. So you have nothing, anyways, from the, when it comes to the Bible, you have nothing from the 1st century, like 150 years of Christianity. So you don't have any historical reliable text to begin with. So you can say, this is historically reliable, this is historically not reliable. You cannot prove to us anything of what Jesus actually said, that he said it himself, let alone come complain about a story about Jesus's when he was young. You have nothing. And then he mentioned this funny story in Matthew where basically Joseph and Mary, they lose, basically he goes missing, Jesus goes missing, which shows you that Mary didn't believe Jesus was God because they weren't looking for him. Imagine God was missing. God, our child God was missing, and we needed to look for him, and we were terrified. It shows you that Mary didn't believe that he was God. Yeah, so it's this claim that is always being regurgitated and repeated. It's a very weak claim when you put it into practice, and it highlights also, like I said, the double standard when it comes to the Christians, because they don't apply the same methodology to what they believe in.
And so you have these things that get smuggled into the text of the Quran, but they're jumbled. And they have, so there are characters that are in some places that shouldn't be in others. Haman, who is from the book of Esther, ends up in the Exodus story as the right-hand man to Pharaoh. Well, there are hundreds of years between the Persian story of Esther and the Egyptian story of Moses and Pharaoh. So there's confusion and conflation that's going on. Mm-hmm. And I was, at least when I was reading the Quran early on, aware of the biblical narratives. And so when I'm reading the Quran and I'm reading some of the Quran's versions of these stories, it's not hard to pick up on where they're just not right.
Gotcha.
So here's another clear example of how he's like jumbling and mixing everything up, right? So you have this Haman that he talks about in the story of Esther, who's a Persian minister, right? You have this entire story about him. And then you have the name Haman mentioned in the Quran as the minister of Pharaoh. And he says, look, there is a mix-up. Basically, the person copying is mixing up. You're the one who's mixing up. Just because two people have the same name doesn't mean the Quran is talking about the person. Just because my name is Muhammad Ali and the boxer is called Muhammad Ali, that doesn't mean we're the same person. Or if someone writing about Muhammad Ali and he's confusing me with the boxer. Right? This is just common sense. Just because there's two similar names doesn't mean that there is a mix-up. Now, the Quran mentions Haman as a minister of Pharaoh, and it doesn't have a story about him. Now, when you go to this Haman in the book of Esther, the story is completely different. Because in the Quran, Haman is a minister of Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the one who's doing the evil, and he's just commanding his minister to build for him. So he's a minister who's dealing with architecture and building, and he said to him, build me a specific thing. This is his entire role here. This is what the verse is mentioning about him in the Quran. This is his role. Now, when you go to the Bible and look at this Persian minister, there's an entire story about him being an evil guy who's plotting to basically eliminate all the Jews or something like that. And he plots a specific story. And then Esther kind of tells the king about him, and he's captured and he's executed and whatever. So he's the villain in the story. He's the main villain in the story. He's not Haman in the Quran is not the villain in the story. He's just a minister of building that Pharaoh tells him to do a specific thing. So clearly there's no mixing up happening here. It's you trying to pretend that there is a mixing up happening just because two people have the same name. Most people would say that the Pharaoh at the time of Moses was Ramses II. It's around that period. And at the time of Ramses II, there was a minister. He had a minister who was called Baki Khonsu. And Baki Khonsu, he was the minister of building for Pharaoh. So the Quran now would be referring, if we take this narrative, that the Pharaoh at the time of Moses is Ramses II. Then Haman, that the Quran is saying is the minister of Pharaoh, will be this person, Baki Khonsu. And this person had a title. He had the title as the high priest of Amun. He spent his entire ministry basically serving Amun. And he was a minister of architecture, and he was very advanced in architecture and building and all of that. So it fits the Islamic narrative. Okay, what about the name? You have Baki Khonsu, and he has the high priest of Amun, and the name Haman. Where is the correlation? Like I said, he was serving Amun for his entire ministry, and he was a minister of architecture. Okay, so where's the name? Where's the correlation then? Now, the correlation will happen when you start translating the name. So if he was the servant of Amun, how do you say servant? You say servant by saying Ham. And Amun, how do you say Amun in Egyptian? You say Amana. So Ham Amana, Haman in the Arabic can be the Arabized version easily of the Egyptian Ham Amana, which means servant of Amun. And then the Quran would not only be historically accurate, you would even have to ask the question, how is the Quran familiar with this title and this name, since the Rosetta Stone was buried until 1799 and we couldn't even read hieroglyphics. So there is no mixing going on at all. Quran is historically accurate, and you can know for a fact when you look at these details that it is just you trying to make this patch-up work in a way of trying to justify your narrative, which doesn't historically add up when you try to claim that Prophet Muhammad was copying.
And ultimately, Surah 4, verse 157, that denies the crucifixion. That's a pretty serious one.
What does it say? What does it say? I mean, it denies the crucifixion.
Yeah, it says that he was neither killed nor was he crucified, but it was made to appear to them. And it says that even those who proclaim it are in doubt about it. So part of the problem is that there's a little bit of ambiguity in the wording of the Arabic. So some Islamic exegetes and interpreters have interpreted this as he wasn't killed, but he was put on the cross and crucified. Others take that, but it was made to appear to them, and take that as what's sometimes called the substitution theory, where someone else was made to look like Jesus and put in his place. That's a minority view, but it is a view that some scholars like Shabir Ali has articulated in the past, the Ahmadiyya sect of Islam, that this is the perspective they hold. And they actually believe that, they believe actually, so I back up, that was a mistake. They don't believe that. They believe that Jesus was on the cross, but he survived, which is called the swoon theory. That in the crucifixion, when it says that he did not die nor was he crucified, it's that he wasn't crucified all the way because he didn't die, but that actually he recovered afterwards. And they have a story about him going to India and living to over 100 years and having a family and that kind of thing. But there is some ambiguity in the historical commentaries, the tafsir on this particular passage, to where there's debate even amongst Muslims as, is this a full outright denial of the crucifixion? That's what the kind of mainstream Sunni Orthodox perspective would be. But some believe that maybe Judas was dressed up like Jesus and he was put on the cross in Jesus's place, or that Jesus recovered, or that it never happened. It was all an illusion to begin with. But no matter which way you swing it, it's still a denial of one of the most established facts of all of history.
Yeah, so now coming back to the idea of the crucifixion, and like he really mixed up so many things here. First, he's saying Ahmadiyya are a Muslim sect. Ahmadiyyas are not Muslim sect. That would be similar to like saying that Sikhism are Muslims. They're a complete new religion that believe in a new prophet called Mirza Ghulam Ahmad or whatever. It was a creation by the British in India to create separation. Anyways, when they were colonizing, it has nothing to do with Islam. So we don't even care at all what they say about the crucifixion. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, he doesn't represent the verse correctly, because the verse is kind of responding to what he's saying. So Allah says in the Quran, and their claim or their statement, "Inna qatalna al-Masih Isa ibn Maryam Rasulullah," that we killed Jesus the Messiah, son of Mary. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. So it clearly says that they didn't crucify him. He's saying, oh, maybe he was put on the cross, maybe he was crucified. No, he wasn't crucified. Because you can see that the Quran says they did not crucify him. So it says they didn't kill him and they did not crucify him. It's denying these two ideas. وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. It was made to appear onto them. So now he tries to say, oh, and it's one of the most known historical facts or whatever, which is false. I'm going to refute right now. Even the Bible is against this idea of the crucifixion if you read it properly. But not just that. The fact the Quran doesn't have a problem with people believing that Jesus was crucified, because it says it appeared to them so, or it was made to appear to them so. So if it was made to appear to them that Jesus was crucified, then there is no issue that people historically believe that Jesus was crucified. I don't have any problem with that. Now the reality is, was he crucified or not? That's a different story. And Allah says in the Quran that they are in doubt. Those who differ about him are in doubt. So people are in doubt. People don't know what happened. Then Allah says the certain fact, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ يَقِينًا, they certainly did not kill him. But people are in doubt about what happened to Jesus. We're going to talk now about the Bible. Are they in doubt or they're not in doubt? They were in doubt because their narratives of the crucifixion are completely going against each other. And the Bible actually supports more the idea that he wasn't crucified than supporting the idea that he was crucified. So it affirms that the Quran is saying that the people don't know what they're talking about. And he is pushing it like some sort of a historical fact. We're going to ask him, bring us one eyewitness to the crucifixion. A lot of the Christians are going to quote the Bible. The Bible is a 400-year later text. The earliest manuscript you have of the full Bible is 400 years later. You have nothing from the first 150 years, no eyewitnesses of the crucifixion. They would quote Eusebius and Tacitus, which they always quote Eusebius and Tacitus. Eusebius and Tacitus don't help you because they are hundreds of years after the earliest manuscripts we have of the writings, the carbonation of it. And they were just historians writing history. They were not eyewitnesses to the crucifixions themselves. So again, they don't support you. What they said, they're just writing what people said, the hearsay. And we said we don't have an issue with that. In fact, that is in line with the narrative of the Quran. If it appeared to the people so, then people will be saying that he was crucified. But the reality is that he wasn't. And you can see a wisdom in that. If people believe that he was crucified, they're not going to look for him after. So he'll be safe. So we don't have an issue with saying that some people believed in it historically. But where is your proof? Have no eyewitnesses for it. So how is it one of the most believable historical facts or whatever when you don't have any proof for it that you can present for us? Now coming to the Bible, what does the Bible say? You look at the historical narratives of the Bible and they're all going against each other and colliding. You have this narrative about the crucifixion story. When they came to the tomb, there was an angel sitting on the rock or whatever, and he miraculously removed the rock. And you have the same narrative, the same story in the Bible, in the Gospels, but it says, no, actually Mary came and there was no rock. So you can tell that those people writing this history in the Bible, just writing hearsay. They have no clue what really happened, what really took place. Then you have proof that Jesus wasn't even crucified from the Bible. You have Jesus saying, when they ask him for a sign, then he calls them an adulterous generation and says, you'll have no sign except the sign of Jonah. What was the sign of Jonah? Just as he was alive in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, I will be alive for 3 days and 3 nights. So you have this idea of the 3 days and 3 nights, and you have the idea of the sign of Jonah. Both of them are proofs that there was no crucifixion. First, the sign of Jonah. What was the sign of Jonah? The sign was that Jonah was swallowed by the whale. He was in the belly of the whale, but he remained alive. Because if Jonah died, then there is no sign. So the story says that Jonah was alive. So Jonah was alive in the belly of the whale, and that's the sign of Jonah. So if Jesus is doing the same sign, he says, I will give you the same sign, except the sign of Jonah. The same sign, he's going to repeat the same sign. So then would necessitate that he was alive in the grave. Just as Jonah's sign was to be alive in the belly of the whale, Jesus' sign is to be alive in the belly of the earth, in the tomb, for 3 days and 3 nights. Me and you cannot survive for 3 days and 3 nights in a tomb. That's what the sign is. So that means he was alive. He was not killed. He didn't die. So that would go against you. Now, the second point about 3 days and 3 nights. You look at the narrative of the crucifixion and you try your best. And the more you try, you'll see. It's not 3 days and 3 nights. You can say Friday evening and Sunday morning, Sunday dawn time, whatever was the resurrection. And you say Friday evening was the crucifixion or something. What? You have 1 night, 1 day, 2 nights, and you barely 2 days. You can say 2 days and 2 nights if we're being generous. But you can clearly tell it's not 3 days and 3 nights. Some of them will claim, the word day is actually used for a period of time. That's not true, because it says day and night. If it says day and night, then it cannot refer to a period of time. It can only refer to the 24-hour day, because it's referring to the day, i.e. the morning and the night. So he says he will be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And we know historical narrative you can take from the Bible that will show you that he was there 3 days and 3 nights. So whether it is the narrative of the rock, whether it is the narrative of how long he was in the belly of the earth, whether it is what he said about the sign, all of it is against your narrative of the crucifixion from your own Bible, which is, by the way, a late text, which is not an eyewitness account again. So look, this idea of the crucifixion, trust me, it's more an argument against you than it is an argument for you. And I like I said, I extend an invitation, like I already reached out to you, extend an invitation so we can have an actual discussion. Let's have a discussion about Islam and Christianity. Rather than having these videos where you're speaking to someone who has no clue about Islam, a non-Muslim has no clue about Islam, why don't you actually talk to a Muslim and let's exchange ideas. Let's talk about the preservation of the Bible, because I see you talk about manuscripts and preservation of the Bible, and talk about Islam and Christianity, and let's talk about both of them. Since you say you've read the Quran many times, so you're very familiar with Islam and what Islam teaches, and you seem like you're a respectful person, I'm more than happy to engage with you. So if you ever see this video, welcome to comment on it or reach out to me and we can have a chat. But avoiding a discussion will only kind of hurt your credibility and shows that, because if you were talking to a Muslim, he will be able to call out a lot of the false information that you're saying. So hopefully we're going to have a discussion in the future, and hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and assalamu alaikum.